All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict
Live.
All right. Good to see you guys. We're very excited to be here. How are you, Ross?
I'm doing well. I'm envious of your t-shirt.
Oh, you like my t-shirt? Well, I like yours
it.
too. Well, you have a hat. I don't.
Well,
that's
because
that's
I'm
all right.
special.
Well, you are indeed, Anyway.
What are we going to talk about today, David? We have so many topics. What do you think we should talk about?
Whatever our viewers want. We just talk about anything.
Well, eventually I want to go to ASEAN.
Of course. Yeah, it is a good topic.
But, briefly, there are so many other topics that are of real interest to those interested in geopolitics.
Mm-hmm.
One is the UN and international condemnation of Israel on the Pegasus spy program.
Oh, yeah, that came out too late, I don't know if you guys heard about this or not. The Pegasus spy program, it was sponsored by a company called NSO in Israel. What was worrisome about this Pegasus program is just being used to spy on journalists, activists, human rights, whatever you want to call it. But it's been used for some nefarious activities. Actually, the one that I am very, very familiar with, it has to do with the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist. He was the Saudi citizen. He was tracked through Pegasus, through the phone of his buddy in Canada. So one thing you need to know about Pegasus is Pegasus was able to hack into iPhones. Even though Apple rather saying, no, their phones they can be hacked. Well, guess what? The Pegasus program was able to hack into that. And they found about 50,000 numbers, including the phone number of the two princes of the United Arab Emirates, the daughters there. So, but anyway, it came up to the surface now that Pegasus, and now there are some calls about they're going to have to you're going to have to manage these kind of programs because the government's buying that to spy on other governments, but they end up using them on their own citizens. So,
heavy rains in Henan province in China and the deaths and destruction.
Oh yeah, I saw the images. I was horrified just seeing that. As a matter of fact, they said they never had a rain like that in Henan province.
Well, as we track this through China,
it
looked like these are the worst floodings in history. And it's common in a number of places in the world.
Wow. Yeah, I did see some images. They were very devastating. So,
what about the Madagascar president who has just survived an assassination attempt?
Indeed. I read up on that. I was very surprised. The reason I followed up on that, it's because who was involved in the assassination plot. As a matter of fact, there were two French citizens were caught. So Madagascar, you may know, you might not. It's in southeast part of Africa and in the western side of the Indian Ocean. It's one of the largest islands in the world. As a matter of fact, Madagascar was the island where the king of Morocco, King Mohammed V, back in the 50s, he was exiled into that country. So the authorities now in Madagascar are rounding up the people who were involved in this. So what's interesting about the island is that its ethnicity is made up of Malay, Indonesians, the Arabs, the Africans, and some French.
Wow.
That's how it's a mixed island. Very nice from what I heard. I've never been there.
Well, there was a major donation from Qatar's.
Oh, Qatar.
Let me say it one more time. Qatar. Okay. In support of Yemen in the food program.
Well, that's correct because of the famine that's going on in Yemen. I don't know if you guys have been aware of what's taking place in Yemen. Usually the news doesn't come out of that part of the world. But what the Saudis and United Arab Emirates are doing, the atrocities they are committing against the Yemenis are horrible. And yet we in the West are turning a blind eye on that. The reason being because we sell weapons. Shame on us for doing that. I mean, literally for something like this, I will speak out because I've been there and I saw. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the Arab world. They really don't have much. And yet what the Saudis and Yemenis are doing, it's beyond belief. It just, and I still do not understand why the West is so quiet about it. So Qatar decided to donate $100 billion on just for the food programs because the massive famine, kids are dying there. So,
well, you talk about the changes going on in the Middle East. China is now visiting Egypt and Syria. Whoa!
Oh yeah, I read a research, a white paper about that one. I found it very interesting. Just FYI, guys, my academic background is in international security. I have a PhD in international security, but I also concentrated on the Middle East. That's one of the areas where I have my academic focus on. I was very, not surprised, but sort of taken by now China is reaching out to some key allies of the US, like Egypt. Well, Egypt now wanted to enter into some business deals with China. And I can see why. As a matter of fact, guys, we're going to do a show specifically about that because there is a lot to be said given what's going on in that part of the world. The same thing applies to Syria because China now is going to rebuild Syria. What's interesting about the visit, it came right after the re-election of the Bashar al-Assad for the next 7 years. So we can just see what's going to be coming out in the Middle East.
You know, no matter how, you know, you and I do this all day, every day.
Yeah.
Mostly 7 days a week. Because we're doing deep research and checking over and over again to make sure we got it right.
That's correct.
I'm still surprised.
Yeah, nobody saw that coming.
Right.
You know, I've been always arguing that China is going to expand its presence in the Middle East gradually. I've been arguing this point since 2016, actually. Yeah. So.
The United States and Germany have reached an agreement about the Russian pipeline.
Oh, the Nord Stream 2. Finally, the US is saying to the Germans, we are not going to block anything. So we're going to let the project proceed for it to be completed in one condition, that Russia will not use energy as weapons against Ukraine or Eastern Europe, you know, or otherwise the US will sanction Russia, which I don't quite understand. You know, it was just a formality, basically, to show on the world stage that the US still can dictate to, but it's not going to work. So Europeans, especially the Germans, Angela Merkel is about to retire, so that will be one of her legacies. Moving forward,
too,
exactly.
It's
one of her legacies going to be. Historians will be talking about that some 20, 30, 40 years from now. So.
Let's move on to China versus the US in ASEAN.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, we're going to thank our Patreon members.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're going to remember.
Tomorrow.
Yes, we do have not a show. It's an official Zoom, live Zoom presentation. We're going to be doing it for the Patreon members, and we're going to do it about the geopolitics in the 21st century. This one's going to be just an overview of what we're going to be detailing in the course. So because we're going to be offering the course later on in more details, and we structured already the course in the modules, and it's going to be in every region of the world with details about specific countries. So
nice.
China is one of them, by the way.
Oh, so
Russia is one of them. You know, Iran is one of them. Germany, Latin America, also certain countries. So tomorrow for our Patreon members on at 11. Am I correct? Our producer just confirmed. Indeed, it's at 11 Central Time for GMT. So we look forward to interacting with our Patreon member. But also we thank all of you guys for your support. And for you, if you truly want to support us, consider subscribing to our Patreon membership, rather. So, okay. All right. Let's
go on to ASEAN.
Let's talk about ASEAN
and the competition between China and the United States. And the people, the countries in ASEAN say, we don't want to have to take sides. We're here to do business, not get involved in you guys' bug tussle.
That's correct, because, well, first of all, we want to just provide a glimpse about what ASEAN is. What does ASEAN stand for? Is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It was established in August 8, 1967, if I'm not mistaken, by about 4 or 5 founding members, about Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, and Thailand. Yes, Thailand. Then Brunei joined back in 1984, Laos in 1997, Myanmar in 1997, Cambodia is 1999, and Vietnam in 1995. That makes them a 10-member country association. Well, what's interesting about ASEAN, before we delve into all this, is because I believe, and I'm sure you share this opinion with me, Ross, that it is important to highlight the significance of ASEAN. I don't think so people understand the weight ASEAN have. They might not even understand it themselves. But here is the thing. This geopolitical competition between the United States and China is going to allow ASEAN to now have a seat at the table.
Nice.
So,
you take a look at the numbers here.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, just a few years ago, in this group, there were 7, 8, 9, $10 billion worth of commerce. And today there is?
For the trade with China, it's about $434 billion. As a matter of fact, economically speaking, just for you to understand, I mean, for all of us, not just you, for all of us to understand the economic impact ASEAN has. Well, ASEAN, when you look at it as, if you look at ASEAN as one country, that will be a GDP of about $2.8 trillion, almost 3. And with the population of about 650, that's more than Europe, the US, and Canada, if I'm not mistaken. So you can just see why ASEAN has weight. It just, they never exercised it before. Now, with the conditions of the competition between the US and China, they're going to play a role in determining which direction things going to go. As a matter of fact, we're going to do a show about this one because we're going to go in more details about this one here. So that is exactly what we're going to be talking today. And we always, as we always do, we'll do about 25, 30 minutes. Then we'll open up the questions, the floor for your questions. And basically that's what we do.
If you take a look at Malaysia as an example of this, we have a population of about 32 million, and we have a remarkably important trade route that goes through it. And we're seeing that they've got a real vested interest in making it go with ASEAN because of the trade route and because they're a growing, emerging economy.
That's correct. Well, because also Malaysia is a founding member. Remember, there are 5 founding members. Yeah, when you think of Malaysia, you think of Singapore also.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and you think of, for example, the port of Singapore. You think of the Malacca Strait. You think of all the Philippines, the South China Sea, and all this. You can just see why that competition now is getting very tense between the US and China. The one thing that I know, based on the reading that I've conducted so far, and since I'm in the process of compiling information to write a book about China, I believe China has the upper hand. Why? Because China is approaching those countries to do
a win-win scenario,
to do business with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is why the foreign minister Wang Yi invited the foreign ministers of ASEAN into China about 3 weeks ago or so. There's also a reason, guys. We want just to let you know this. Sometimes we take time before we talk about a topic, whatever, even though it might be a week or 2 late. The reason for that is because we want to make sure the information is accurate. So we do have our way of fact checking the information to make sure it's accurate.
Just so you know, it's always multiple sources.
Exactly. So that is the reason why now ASEAN is in that position between, which direction they're going to go. Well, also when you consider the human factor into all this, 650 million people.
And their ability to purchase and how they're impacting the economies of everybody now. We're seeing a rising middle class.
That's correct.
We're seeing more and higher level of employment. We're seeing a more content, happy population. And when these people are looking at China, they're smiling.
Well, it's because here's the thing that we all need to understand. When ASEAN was formed, when was it formed? As we said again, in 1967.
Actually, a long time ago.
It was, but what was happening around that time? Right when the world was polarized by the Cold War. That's exactly. And the importance of the ASEAN at that time was to be nothing but an economic driven. They didn't want to get involved in that. As a matter of fact, they signed a treaty that none of them would ever build nuclear weapons. Yeah,
that was smart.
Yeah, and I'm very aware of one particular treaty that I read up on it a little bit that was signed in 1971. That specific treaty spells out the words that ASEAN countries will stay neutral. They don't want to get involved in. So this is where you see now the US is pushing for influence, and China's kind of, because it's in its backyard, they're going to have to do what they're going to have to do.
Yeah, it's the joke we frequently say. I think Macron said it.
Yeah.
Look at the geography.
Yeah, where China is and
where China is, where ASEAN is, and where the United States is.
That's correct. So and that is the reason why ASEAN made sure that when they signed that treaty, they made a deal between themselves. Once again, I am very convinced, and I could be wrong, guys, because I'm learning as I go along. I could be wrong. But one thing I am personally, and this is my personal opinion that I'm convinced about, ASEAN does not understand its power. Yeah, they can influence, they can now, I believe, they can tip the balance in one direction or another.
They're that powerful.
Yeah, that's because especially they are also seeing, they are evaluating what's taking place economically with China's economic rise, which is a fact. We can't sugarcoat this. I know in the West, they don't like to hear that. I've seen some comments. I forgive people. I tend to do that, but I do not have tolerance for nonsense. I have no tolerance for that nonsense. Yeah, because those are facts. The economy of China is growing in comparison to the rest of the world
at a shockingly high rate.
Yeah, and ASEAN are realizing, okay, this is an economic opportunity for us because that's what they are after. Remember, some countries in ASEAN are still a decade away from being fully developed. You take Cambodia, you take Myanmar, you take Laos. Those are not fully developed yet. So they still need infrastructure. They still need some sort of investments. China is willing to do this. Plus, like you mentioned earlier, Ross, the proximity. So to them, it's a win-win. So on the other hand, and I'll give one example here before we move forward into the conversation. I'll give one example about Philippines.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Philippines, when you look at it geographically where it's located, of course, Philippines plays a major role. And by the way, we are aware of the tensions that exist between certain members of ASEAN and China regarding South China Sea. But they are willing to sit down and resolve those matters.
Right.
And I think there is a conversation going on right now between ASEAN and China regarding the South China Sea issues. They needs to be dealt with because you can't just be kicking the can down the road. In the case of the Philippines, and why do I specify Philippines? Because Philippines, before Duterte came to power in 2016, the country was on a different track than what it is today. Because in 2016, as you know, Duterte got closer a little bit to China. That didn't set well with the US. Yeah. And there is a reason for that. And the reason to that has to do with access. Why? Because Philippines geographically provide the perfect location to choke China's waterways.
Right.
Yeah. Why? Because South China Sea, all the waterways coming through that area, you're looking at about 80% of China's oil import comes through there, and 40% of China's export go through there. So you can just see, if you block that waterways there, that's going to be a problem.
Well, if the goal is to reduce the growth of China, that looks like a very good hotspot to make it happen.
I know, but Philippines will be caught in the middle, and they are aware of this. They don't want to be,
and that's why they decided what they did.
Yeah, you got the population in Philippines. Not all, of course. I shall not generalize, but majority, they lean towards the U.S. Some of them are saying, no. We see China as a threat. President Duterte, on the other hand, is looking at the investments, is looking at the infrastructure, is looking at the economic opportunities that China can provide. And actually, during his visit in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, or last year, I don't remember that one, China pledged $24 billion in investments. As a matter of fact, they did build some infrastructure in Manila, in Mindanao and Manila. They did build some.
Mm-hmm.
So the Philippines argument, I should say, with the U.S. has to do with the defense agreement. It is an agreement that they signed the way back, without going into more detail here. Where the challenge in the Philippines, they argue, is that the U.S. is not looking at them as an ally, because they just about to deliver the F-16s. Well, the F-16s, that deal has been negotiated and agreed upon back in the 80s. Long time ago. Which means what? Basically, the U.S. will give the F-16s that is becoming obsolete. Those are almost Vietnam-era weapons. Unlike some analysts have argued, analysts inside the Philippines have argued that when you compare the relationship of the U.S. with, let's say, Egypt, for example, or Jordan, whatever, they don't have an F-16s, they have an F-18s. So how come Philippines is getting the end of the stick, basically? That's what it is. But the importance of the Philippines, it has nothing to do with the country itself, but the bases in Philippines.
And Duarte said, no.
Not explicitly. It just, they made it clear that they don't want to have Philippine territory used on a rotational basis for in case a conflict with China. Because the whole thing about these ASEAN countries and the location and everything has nothing to do with ASEAN per se. Everything else has to do with Taiwan. That's the whole scenario about
South China Sea.
The whole issue as to why the United States now in a fierce competition, geopolitical competition, that is with China, because of the Taiwan issue. That's where the what's the word I'm looking for? That is what's at the core of this geopolitical competition. So. And this is where the idea of, if you think about where countries, ASEAN is going to have to approach this, they have to approach it very delicately. Of course, they don't want to upset the US, but at the same time, they don't want to miss the opportunity with China, economically speaking. And as I said earlier, there are countries that they are not fully developed yet. They're still in the, they might be a decade away. So the other aspects that I see moving forward with this competition, geopolitical competition, it has to do with the microchips.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So because of the markets, and China wants to make sure that they can ensure access to, because I do believe the microchip is going to become one of the hallmark of a Cold War, economic that is, between China and the United States.
You know, there's some movement in Singapore to be building those things. I was much surprised to see there's some movement in Thailand to build those things. They're going, That's remarkable.
Yeah, well, as ASEAN countries, can you imagine if there is an agreement between, hypothetically, just those two countries and China to put the investments in, to invest money and so forth? Can you see where it's going? So even though you're hearing now, for example, some countries like Japan is trying to put some investments here and there, you know, we all know what Japan's intentions are. I don't know. I don't know what the outcome will be, whether ASEAN countries will buy into that or not. But so far, what is clear is that that competition is between the United States and China. But China appears to have the upper hands in all this. The human aspects to it, that's when it's gonna be very, because when you look at a market with over almost 650 million consumers,
that speaks with a very loud voice.
It does, and economically speaking, you're gonna have to, if you are like we always say when advising clients, you're gonna have to think about the share of the market. So you can't, if you are a CEO of a company, you can't ignore a market of 650 million consumers, even if you might not reach all of them. But that's at least a large portion of it will be very, very important. So that is one of the issues of the competition between the China and the US. What was very surprising is that the current administration in Washington doesn't seem to deviate from its previous administration. And that, by the way, brings me, remind me of one point. And the point is, during the last 3 or 4 years, 3 years, the United States did not attend the ASEAN meetings. What signal is that sending?
That they don't care. It's not one of their priorities.
Yeah.
And ASEAN, you're on your own.
Yeah, and that's how ASEAN's looking at it, and rightly so, because they have to think in terms of those, because they are seeing it that way. So when the United States didn't show up, ASEAN's saying, what are we waiting for? They just got to deal with the Chinese. I do believe, and this is my personal opinion, I do believe that ASEAN is leaning more towards China than it is towards the US.
For a number of very good and
compelling reasons. Well, we saw that with Indonesia.
Boy, did we see it.
Yeah, that's usually what I saw, what I saw going on. So, okay. Yeah, well, I'm reminded here, please, when you put your question, make sure, please, to put question before, so we know exactly it's your question. It's because, that makes it easier for us to follow through and all that. So that is one of the key issues that I foresee moving forward is how far the US is willing to go and how far is China's willing to push. Yeah, because this is almost like pull-push, a strategy between Washington and Beijing. And you can see the reason why. In geopolitics, there are always the national interests that define and determine the nature of the policies that's any government will have to structure. And this is where I believe, again, that ASEAN, they do not all of them, I shall not generalize here, but they just are not aware of their own power as a bloc. Because now what ASEAN is doing now, ASEAN is moving together as a bloc, the equivalency of the EU. Yeah, they are moving into that direction. And there are some estimates that by 2050, ASEAN could become the third global economy.
That's not that far away.
It's not that far. But what's going to happen in 2050? Because in 2049 is China's anniversary for the 100th. You can just see there is why, at least in the case of China, it moves according to plans. Because they don't have elections every 4 years. So we don't. So we do. So all right. So we're gonna open up this floor for your questions here, and we'll just discuss whatever questions you might have. And I think I might have a question for you guys. So I'll ask you later on, and we'll go from there. All right. Let's try. Ariel, good to see you. Question: what do you think will the geopolitical implication if China and Thailand overbuild the Crack Canal, being an alternative to the Malacca Strait? Oh, that will have a significant impact, geopolitically speaking. Yeah, because it's just gonna almost, and I may use the term, free up China from worrying about what if scenario in Malacca. So that's a strategic move if both countries decide to, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Beryakov, good to see you, Beryakov. Question: as U.S. is focusing on China, leaving Iraq soon, and loosen grip on Russia, Bernie Sanders and others tried to limit President of the United States to declare war and the budget without Congress approval. Is war coming? No. And mainly just to make sure, just for our viewers, the reference is a war coming with China?
Right.
No. Because that will be not only devastating, it just will not make any sense for the U.S. to really put itself into that position, let alone the neighboring countries around that area. They're gonna suffer tremendously, because it is my belief, and this is my personal opinion, China's not gonna back down, this time around. So I hope no, I don't see it going that way. Second, on the home front, it will become a political nightmare for the Democrats if that will proceed that way.
Oh, unbelievable.
It will be, given the country is already divided here, politically speaking.
So, after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, Vietnam too,
and Iraq now.
I mean, the mood in this country for another war is terrible. The answer is we don't want another one, and we will do justice to those people who bring it to us.
That's correct.
Get them out of office.
You're right. Village, good to see you, and thank you, Village, for your comment yesterday. I read it. Thank you so much for that. The question: what do you think is the reason for this new Cold War between China and U.S. hegemony, #1 economy? Something else? Okay. Well, first of all,
that's a worthwhile question.
It is a good question, Village. Thank you so much for that. The Cold War, I know we use this term. It just, this one is very, very different. Very different on a different dimensions. China is not Russia. You need to understand that, historically speaking. Of course, ideologically similar to Russia to a degree, but the Cold War that we experienced between the United States and Russia was ideologically driven. That was the main reasons for that. This one between China and the United States, it is in the works. That Cold War is gonna be coming. It's just gonna be on a different dimensions. And I'm gonna wait to answer this one till I ask you guys the question, because the answer is there for that one. So I'm gonna hold off on answering that one. That is a good question. So it will be a Cold War of sort. It's just not the one we experienced back with the Soviet Union. So. Kwan, good to see you, Kwan. Question: what do you think of Singapore's position? Still trying to maintain a difficult balance between the US and China, or already on the US side? No, not on the US side 100%. Remember, most members, and Singapore was a founding member of the ASEAN, when they signed those treaties, one of the key things was for prosperity and economic investments. And the Treaty of 1971 made it clear that they don't want to have dominions from the US or from China or from any other country. They want to remain independent. They just do not know how to exert that power into the outside world yet. Why? Because some of their economies, like you take Laos, for example, you take Cambodia, Vietnam to a degree, Myanmar, their economy is still not where they need to be for them to explicitly come out and display that kind of power, if you will. No, for Singapore, they are all evaluating where things are, but so far they made it clear they don't want to be the pawn between China and the US. It's going to become like a ping pong. They don't want to be that. So, and Singapore has the means by which to really make it clear which direction it goes, either this way or that way. So, and that remains to be seen for that. Wamo, thank you for being here, and thank you for your comments yesterday. I read it, and you kept your word, by the way, because you said you will attend the live stream. So thank you for being here. Question: will the U.S. ever be able to leave the Middle East to really pivot to Southeast Asia? Can the U.S. really fight a war with China if it is still tied up in the Middle East? I'll start by second part, since that's my, as I said earlier, my academic background. The answer is no. Even though some assessments in the Pentagon saying, no, we can fight two fronts. It will be devastation for us to do so. Second thing, U.S. will not leave the Middle East. There are too many influencers, variables, if you will, that influence American policy when it comes down to the Middle East, including the Central Command in Florida. Because when you think of the Middle East, what do you think about? The first thing, natural resources, oil. The U.S. still, regardless of how much oil we have here, and we do have a lot, except our oil is not a good quality oil. It needs a lot of refinement. So it's cheaper for us to buy it from the Middle East than to extract it from here and refine it and so forth. Second thing, you get countries like Saudi Arabia, they have lobbyists here in the United States that lobby Congress to push for certain directions. We will never hear about this here in the US. The media will never mention that because those lobbyists are very, very influential, and the Saudis are putting serious money. So this is why I don't foresee the United States leaving the Middle East. Now, the key thing about the US in the Middle East is that the US leadership in the Middle East has been declining. The invasion of Iraq was not a smart move. I argued against it back then, but it was the comment that I got. Oh no, Mr. David, it's gonna be a cakewalk.
Yeah, right.
Quickly. My argument back then was, if you go in, you're not coming back out till probably 20 years or so.
Well, you were right on that.
And that's exactly what happened. So I don't see the U.S. leaving the Middle East, but it might not have the same influence as once did. Because remember, who's now managing certain areas in the Middle East? Russia. Yeah, you think about Syria. Who's managing that? It's Russia, not the US. Who's managing Libya? Is Russia, not the US. And with China's visit, like Ross mentioned for the visit to Egypt and Syria, that's an indication right there. So I don't see them moving out of the Middle East. As far as a war with China, no, it won't happen. At least not now. Only if Taiwan becomes the issue. Nick, good to see you, Nick, and thank you for your comments. The question is, I read somewhere else that Aung San Suu Kyi is a product of the CIA. What are your thoughts on this? Wow. Not necessarily the CIA, but it will be the West in general, because remember, one thing about the West, if they wanna, I want to use the term stir up trouble.
But you might.
Yeah, because if we gotta be straightforward about all this. I will use the right term, is destabilize. Yeah, because that's what it is. Usually you will go about it that way, to destabilize something. Aung San Suu Kyi, it's kind of had her life in England and all that stuff, and all of a sudden coming to me, I have nothing against Myanmar, but at the same time, where was she when the genocide was taking place in Myanmar? So, because you can say I am a leader only in a good time. A leader will have to be tested on both the good and the bad. And you stand your ground, either or. That's like us saying something here live and somebody might not like it. Well, guess what? I am going to, personally, and I don't speak for us, I'm going to say it. Because that is my duty towards you guys, all of you, towards our viewers. Can sugarcoat it, but if you don't like it, well, maybe that's not for you. That's how I look at it. So, because that honesty is very, very important. So the idea of the Aung San Suu Kyi, no, it was the I won't use the product. It was the strategy of the West. Because remember, Myanmar is closer to what? China. So, because anything you want to do around China to surround, it's like what we're doing right now. Let's not make a bomb about it. We have about 400 bases in that part of the world surrounding China. Why do we need 400 bases? Yeah,
to stifle their economy.
so you can just see. So it's more mainly the West in general, not just the CIA itself. Man. Akila, good to see you here, Akila. And the question is, there is a huge competition for Sri Lanka from US, China, and India because of possession. What do you think future hold for Sri Lanka? Will they be a geopolitical prisoner like Djibouti? Oh, that is a good one. I must admit, I do not know a lot yet about Sri Lanka. I've been coming across some readings, and I intend to personally read up first to really inform myself. And Russ and I will discuss if we want to do a show on it. As far as Sri Lanka becoming like Djibouti, that could be a possibility for that, because Sri Lanka also is in a key position there. So nobody thought about Djibouti. In case of Djibouti, and I've been there and I saw with my own eyes. Back then, nobody thought of Djibouti like, till all of a sudden you have China, you have the US, you have Japan, and you have next door Russia establishing a base in Sudan, naval base. Well, when you look at it geographically, why Djibouti is important? You have access to the Arabian Sea and you have access to the Indian Ocean.
There it is.
1/4 of the global transits of goods goes through that water. So Sri Lanka could play a role into that. But I have to really, really educate myself to speak informally about it. And we intend to do a show on it. And but one thing I can say, based on my understanding of the geopolitical landscape, yes, Sri Lanka could play the same role as Djibouti right now. So. Oh, Dakin, son, good to see you. The question is, do you think ASEAN have the power to help solve the crisis in Myanmar? Will US interfere with the solution? Well, yeah, to me, it makes common sense. Wouldn't you rather have the ASEAN members solve the issue with a member than having an outsider come in?
Very much so. I mean, having the US come in creates so much resentment.
Exactly, because they're going to be perceived as interference.
And too often they're perceived as invaders.
Well, look at some other parts of the world. Yeah. It will make more sense if ASEAN gets involved directly rather than the US. Jack Robert, good to see you, Jack, and thank you for being here. So, and I think I read one of your comments. Thank you for that, Jack. The question is, if ASEAN is looking to China already, as US is pushed out, what will happen to the Quad and Australia? Australia's economic punishment, a lesson to ASEAN countries. Wow. What a great question, Jack. Thank you. See, this is once again, and I will say it.
Yeah.
This is what I personally like these live streams, because we do have individuals that you guys truly display the intellectual strength that we strive for. And this is why sometimes, on a personal note, I push back against those individuals that make some really, really ignorant comments, because it's not about us. Because I looked at him as an insult to you, to your intellectual level, and I kind of won't have it with those kind of individuals. I'll make it clear. because of respect for you guys. So to go back to your question, what was the question again? No, I'm just teasing. So yeah, just to understand about the Quad aspects of it and how will it work. Yeah, ASEAN will think in those terms because it's already been displayed. Look no further than South Korea, how they reacted. Even Japan now is saying they are part of Quad, but they are not part of Quad. Well, Japan cannot play it both ways, being wishy-washy. You're either in or out. Australia is committed to that. India, given its massive poverty and so forth, I personally do not understand why India even needs to get involved in stuff like that. So the US is trying to expand the Quad, even though I have my understanding of it is it's not going to work. It won't work in the long term because country is going to have to think in terms of economic incentives.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, this seeing where China's going, what would I want to tie myself to a Quad for? What?
To lose a lot of business.
Yeah, I don't see the Quad going anywhere. It starts with 4 and it's gonna die with 4. That's because if it were anything promising of this, we would have seen South Korea.
More countries would have joined if there was a win scenario here.
Exactly.
But it's all lost.
Yeah, we would have seen Singapore. We would have seen Indonesia, for example. And none of them wants to be involved. Now, Australia was a different story. Why even Australia got involved? That's Morrison's government. They have to figure that out, let alone the mismanagement of how they handle the relationship with China that end up impacting the business community altogether. So that's where the issue is. Next question, Tugger. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Thank you for being here and thank you for your question. The question is, could China alone with ASEAN establish a European Union NATO type bloc? No. The quick answer to that, no, I don't see it going that way. The reason being because ASEAN by itself wants to have that the equivalency of the EU bloc. But as far as NATO, because remember, ASEAN signed the treaty. They are not after. As a matter of fact, I'm going to quote it for you here as to what they did for the for the treaty they signed. One of them was recently in 2015, and it says, and I quote, "It is established ASEAN Economic Community, a major milestone in the organization regional economic integration agenda." Nothing about military alliance of sort. That's why I do not see them going that direction of the military alliance. And second, in their charter, ASEAN charter, they made it clear no nuclear development, no nuclear weapon development whatsoever. So I don't see. What I do see, however, is that the trade value is going to only keep growing because, yeah, ASEAN right now is China's #1 trade partner.
And we see the dynamic growth that looks like it doesn't have a ceiling to it. It's just going to keep getting better and better and better. And the impact on the country's economies is going to be staggeringly good.
Well, when you take into consideration almost $3 trillion economy, GDP, you're going to have to think in those terms. Second thing, also, China's foreign investments have been increasing, so
right.
Which means China can divert some of that money into the ASEAN countries. Won't they want to take some of that investments and grow and all that? I will. So that's why I don't see them going into the direction of the bloc and so forth. So, okay, now I am gonna, guys, ask you a question, and if you feel like responding, just put some comments and I will read them later. And here is my question to you, all of you guys. And the question is, do you guys believe that the rivalry between China and the US, okay, China and the US, when it comes down to ASEAN or the Southeast Asia part, could go in the same line as the Cold War between Russia and the United States? In other words, could this rivalry between US and China escalate to the level of the Cold War experienced between the United States and China. So between the United States and Russia, rather. So I look forward to reading your comments. All right, next question is Thunder Dragon. Good to see you. Wow, that's a great screen name.
I really like it.
I wouldn't want to mess around with you, but I'm just joking here. So good to have you here, and thank you for your question. The question is, will China eventually set up military base in Myanmar in order to secure her sea shipping lane access? It is hard to tell at this point, even though I am leaning towards saying no at this point. The reason being because remember, China's foreign policy to a degree is not based on a military posturing. In other words, unlike how the United States went about it, because one of the things the United States has, yes, the military might, whatever, but also the presence of US bases around the world, over 756, if I'm not mistaken. China does not want to go that route. China wants to go route of the economy. BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, that's the equivalency. Because countries will respond more to economic incentives than they do to a military presence. Look no further. The best example I can give you is Germany right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you ask the Germans, and I used to go a lot to Europe, to Germany, and not everybody is so excited about the military presence in Germany. So
when I lived there,
yeah,
they hated it. They weren't neutral about it. They wanted the armies to go home.
Exactly. And China doesn't want to devote that money towards just establish. Now, that doesn't mean they can't do that, but they want to ensure that access to water is secured. And I am sure they'll do it by any means, if I may use the term. So, all right, a question. Oh, Wade. Thank you, Wade, for your question. Okay, where's the question? Oh, do you think Iran will join the SCO? That's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, there is a possibility for that because there are talks right now as far as Iran and China regarding that agreement they just signed, the $400 billion agreement. And that's usually, for me personally, I interpret it that way as an indication for more rapprochement between the two countries. I remember I wrote an article, I'm going to post it for you guys, way back in 2015, or right after they agreed on the JCPOA with the West. And I said, I would not be surprised in due time that China and Iran might enter into some military venture together. I even went as far as saying the possibility that Iran might allow China a naval base in the Persian Gulf. Yeah, of course, I got some pushback about that. No, there is no way. And guess what? 6 months later, the head of China's military went over to Iran. So there is a possibility to that. They still have to work out few details, but I won't be surprised because remember one thing, Iran is going to play a major role in China's BRI. So it makes perfect sense to have them into the SCO. KN Lam, good to see you here and thank you for your question. Okay, what's your take on State Department Wendy Sherman visit to Tianjin? How do you pronounce that, Ross?
Tangiers?
Yeah, no.
I can't see.
Yeah, Tianjin.
Oh, okay.
Tianjin. I hope I pronounce it correctly.
Close
China.
enough.
She didn't make it to Beijing. Oh, I'm not aware of her visit, to be honest with you. I'm not aware of that. And what will she go there for? I do not even know. Wendy Sherman, she's the one who played a role into the Iran nuclear negotiations and all that stuff. So she does have an understanding of. No, I'm not aware of her visit at all because I usually don't pay attention much to for something like that one. So, but if it is, that tells me it's significance, because if she used to go to China and didn't go to Beijing, well, what's the point?
She's not talking to the central government.
She's not talking to central government. You're absolutely correct, Russ, because that becomes just a sideshow.
Right.
So I don't see unknown. Good to see you here. I like that screen name.
Yeah.
Unknown. So yeah. Good to see you here. A question. I want to understand for an American why U.S. always needs to be in rivalry conflict. U.S. is a rich nation. I am sure there are other products it can sell to make money other than weapons.
Oh God, is that true?
Well, to a degree, but I have to break it to you. No, we don't, because we are a consuming society, not a producing society.
That's right.
So we don't produce, we consume a lot. Well, we produce weapons at a high level. So yeah, so we can't. And the problem as a rich nation, the conflict is where the weapons are sold. Because remember, those are not your a million or two, those are in billions. And the more conflict they are, the more weapons we sell. And this is why this rivalry between China and US, the ASEAN countries are thinking twice about, okay, which direction do we need to go? Because to the US is a conflict, to the ASEAN is prosperity, economic prosperity. But as far as your last point, no, we don't produce much. We consume a lot. So thanks to China. Yeah. Well, because otherwise we
couldn't afford it.
Yeah. Well, look at the masks. They produce masks here. Nobody bought them. Hospitals were turning that down. We had about 260 million masks in warehouses. Why? Because hospitals went over and bought them from China, far cheaper.
Far cheaper.
Yeah. So we're consuming society. All right. Mbe, good. I think I cannot pronounce that first name. Tijandoa. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Good to see you here, and thank you for being here. The question is, do you think that China, US are cooperating in unspoken agenda like the space race? There seems to be evidence that all countries are hiding the true flat earth shape of the earth from everyone. No, they are not cooperating on space because China is establishing its own. Wade, one more question here from Wade. Good to see you, Wade, and thank you. A follow-up question is, if that happens, do you think Iran exchange rate shall match the Saudi riyal? To a degree, maybe not, because the problem with this, I see more than a financial, it's more geopolitical, because which means what? That will give the Iran more geopolitical clout than Saudi Arabia. Because remember, in Saudi Arabia, the only clout they have is because they are under the umbrella, security umbrella that is of the United States. If it weren't for the United States, Saudis won't be able to do a thing. They can't survive without America. That's a given, that's a reality. They won't want to admit to it. I mean, they can forsake build a car, let alone defend themselves on all that. All that's so. What this is going to give to Iran is the geopolitical clout in the region. Iran is already having some, because he was able to achieve certain, like their missile capabilities. That's domestically. It's not from a foreign support or whatever. It's from their own. So a cooperation with China or being part of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation, will boost Iran's prestige to that level. And as far as the financial part, I do not know whether it will exceed the Saudi riyal or not. All right, one more question. And the last question is, okay, Alex. Question, Alex. The question is, a Taiwanese YouTube channel host has raised this question. Why have China neighboring ASEAN countries become rich, but US neighboring states in Central and South America have remained so poor? Wow.
What a great question.
That's a great question. And you hit the nail on the head. I don't even know what to say to this one, Ralph, because it's true.
It is true. And what we see is the investment that Beijing is willing to make in these countries in terms of infrastructure, and always developing a win-win scenario. When we take a look at trade with Latin America, it has very, very frequently been a win-lose scenario on the side of the United States. And we have a 100-year history to show it.
Wow. So, Ross, as a trained psychologist, what do you think the difference between Latin American people and neighboring China people psychologically with this boost of one of them is boosting and one of them is going down?
Oh, when you take a look at Latin America, you see so many different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and you see so many different economies. And when I talk to Latin people, so many of them face economic depression. Whereas you take a look, I've interviewed a number of people from, say, Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
most recently Vietnam, and they're all optimistic. They're saying, yeah, we got too many people, we got a lot of pollution, but our economy is booming like we've never seen it before. So we're seeing despair versus hope.
Versus, yeah, that's the big difference between the two. So, all right. Well, we want to thank you so much for being here. We have other stuff to go prepare for our Patreon. But also remember, guys, if you like our videos and you want to support us, consider joining our Patreon membership. And please, please, please spread the words about subscription, because we don't need to have our subscription numbers up. We need that, and we couldn't do it without your support. So we want to thank you so much. And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.